Ne možete se oslanjati samo na turizam, potrebna vam je industrija i tehnologija, za Direkt kaže čovjek koji je prije 2 godine dobio Nobelovu nagradu za ekonomiju. James A. Robinson napisao je knjigu Zašto nacije propadaju, a evo što je u intervjuu rekao našem Borku Brunoviću.
So, Professor Robinson, why do some countries stay poor and others get rich if it's not about resources and geography?
It's about the institutions that they build. You know, what my research suggests is that countries become rich if they have sets of institutions, of rules that create broad-based incentives and opportunities for the people, what we call inclusive institutions. And countries stagnate economically, become poor if they have the opposite of that, which we call extractive institutions that block opportunities, that block initiative, that don't create incentives for the majority of people.
What is your honest view of Donald Trump's second term? Is democracy under pressure?
President Trump is a symptom, you know, just as I said, corruption is a symptom of institutional problems. President Trump is a symptom of the deep problems that you have in the United States, deep problems of inclusion, you know, deep problems of rising inequality and an enormous kind of cultural gap between different parts of the country, between people with an education, a college education, people without a college education. So there is an institutional crisis in the United States, and President Trump is a symptom of that. Of course, he doesn't have a solution to any of the real problems. That's the sort of the tragedy.
You said that Europe has stagnated for years and that we need to make some hard decisions. What kind of hard decisions?
Well, I think it's obvious, you know. I mean, productivity in Europe has been stagnating for 20 years. You know, it's a remarkable thing. Everybody agrees that there's a problem in Europe. Everywhere I go in Europe, they all agree there's a problem. They all agree there's too much bureaucracy, there's too much regulation. There's an enormous numbers of problems outlined in the Draghi report, cost of energy, lack of depth of financial markets, you know, regulations which impede entrepreneurship. There just needs to be some political momentum behind changing this. You know, there's a lot of consensus.
So everybody knows there's a problem, but
Yes.
no resolution.
No, well, there's no political project to make this happen, it seems, at the moment, and that's a tragedy.
Can a reliance on tourism become a trap for a country such as Croatia?
You know, I think tourism has its pluses and its minuses. You know, that's a good thing. It creates a lot of employment for young people. You know, I think it's an image, it's your image to the world, you know, in some sense. And I think that creates a very positive image of Croatia. Anyone you talk to who's been on Croatia on holiday, they come back saying what a fantastic place Croatia is. The thing I was going to say is it's very hard to generate productivity growth in tourism, you know. So tourism is fine, but you need productivity growth, and for that you need different sorts of economic activity. You need kind of industrial, you need tech, you need to diversify the economy. You can't just rely on tourism.
What is your one piece of advice for Croatian leaders?
You know, you have to come up with a narrative or a strategy for where you want to be. I think the case of Ireland is sort of fascinating, you know, because that's not a country that was a rich or successful country. You know, people left Ireland, you know, and they never came back. And now that's completely changed. You know, for me, as, you know, someone who's English, you look at the difference between Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland. It's completely reversed economically. So I don't know if that's a model for Croatia, but it shows what's possible, you know, if you kind of have a dream, you have an ambition. So I think, you know, Croatia has to think about where it wants to go. You know, the past is the past, but the future is what you make of it. Very surprising things can happen. Nobody predicted what would have happened in Ireland in the last 30 years. So why not in Croatia?